Hi guys, welcome back to yet another instalment of my constant reader journey through the complete works of Stephen King, reading each one for the very first time. Today I wanted to talk about one that is both very unique and also very personal, I think, to King himself in the sort of greater tapestry of his work, and it is the sci-fi epic The Tommyknockers. Now this is a very long story, a very detailed story. I'm going to talk about the 1993 adaptation as well, so make yourself a brew, get comfortable, because this might be my longest Stephen King discussion yet. If you enjoy this video, remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. I've got lots more Stephen King stories to work my way through, and you'll be the first to know when I'm talking about the next one. Now, I was confused, to say the least, as to why Stephen King, in all the years of his writing, involving dozens and dozens of horror books, he's done fantasy books, he's done crime books, why has he only penned a single conventional sci-fi novel? Because yes, other books like Firestarter and It, they have science fiction elements, but The Tommyknockers is really his only typical sci-fi book. You know, it has spaceships, it has aliens. After reading The Tommyknockers, it becomes very clear why it has no successor. It's such a far-reaching epic that I don't think King could possibly top the scale of its vision, and I don't think he wants to either, because I don't think he likes this book from like a sci-fi perspective. It was published in 1987. The book famously represents the height of Stephen King's battles with addiction. Some fans have even speculated that he wasn't physically fit enough to finish the novel himself, and that several ghostwriters were brought in to complete it, while his wife Tabitha sort of staged an intervention for his cocaine abuse. I don't think that is the case. Having read the book cover to cover, I think it's King all the way through. But I don't want to discuss that too much because I don't think it's in the best taste. I think Tommyknockers, the term itself, can either refer to like tunnelling ogres or like ghosts around abandoned mines. It's basically like a Mother Goose nursery rhyme, and it's repeated a lot throughout the book.
I saw it. The Tommyknocker. It's only a nursery rhyme, Davy.
And the adaptation. And it was seemingly widespread enough in New England that both Stephen and Tabitha King would often repeat it. So the year is 1988. Our main character, Roberta Anderson, but she just goes by Bobby, she's a 37-year-old woman. She's spent the last 12 years of her life in a rather solitary living situation in the fictional town of Haven, Maine, of course. She inherited the old Garrick farm from her uncle. After college, she's become quite reclusive. She only spends time with her pet beagle, Peter, and another writer, Jim Gardner, who she also has quite a complicated relationship with. She has a sister named Anne, who lives in Utica and doesn't really talk with her because she doesn't approve of Bobby's lifestyle, and when she comes into the book later, we find out she's quite abusive. Bobby writes Western novels, but has recently struggled to stay motivated to write her latest one that sort of takes place during the Civil War. I think that's like semi-autobiographical, you know, knowing how King himself laboured over writing this book. She takes Peter out into the woods for a walk, and she's kind of struck for the first time by how old her dog is. Peter's like an elderly beagle, and she's had him for 12 years. She worries about his death because then she'll be all alone. And this is when the catalyst for the book comes along. She stumbles upon a big piece of metal buried in the soil. And it immediately captivates her. King goes into great detail to really emphasise the depth of her curiosity, and he's so descriptive we're sort of equally curious about this metal because it hasn't rusted over, In fact, the opposite. The surface is silky smooth, it has a dull gloss to it. She tries to cut into the metal, but the surface is impenetrable. She runs her hand along it and thinks she can like feel it vibrating. She goes on to spend hours and hours working at digging up this metal, and just when she thinks she's got it, there's more of it under the surface, and she wants to find out like what could it possibly be. Her mind just races with possibilities.
What's the matter with you? What? It's just a can. Huh?
Because this metal is much bigger than she anticipated, and it curves in a sort of circular style. And meanwhile, Peter the beagle, he's howling. The book has a lot to say about the intuition of animals and how they're almost like the harbingers of disaster. Like, Peter seems to know something about the ship that Bobby doesn't. She also finds a dead woodchuck near the metal, and its body has started decomposing, but there's no flies on it, which, red flag. She goes to sleep, doesn't wake up for another 12 hours. When she does, her period not only comes early, but she starts to menstruate so thickly that she has to keep reapplying maxi pads. Lots of strange things are happening. Bobby has voices in her head that act as like creative muses. She can hear like her dead grandfather, he's one of them. Her sister Anne is sort of like a negative voice as well. But now there's also a stranger's voice that keeps encouraging her to go back into the woods. And I think this is the start of one of the biggest themes in the book, which is like telepathy.
Oh God, he's so hot I can't stand it. Excuse me? I didn't say anything.
Hey. There you go, Bobby.
Hey, Joe, thanks. Oh, jeez, look at his hair.
I haven't been this horny since I was 16.
Last thing I need is his wife knowing what we're up to. Is there anything else?
You know, this voice can read her mind. She needs to dig up more metal. Even though there's so many omens at this point telling her not to, the temptation is just too strong, and she becomes quite obsessed with what's under that soil. She also sketches the shape of the metal and reveals more of it, and quickly gathers that it resembles a flying saucer, the sort of caricature vehicle that aliens travel in. She tries to deny it outright, but there's no other explanation for a giant metal disc. 30 yards in its circumference, so it's pretty big. It's seemingly crash-landed into Earth. Bobby considers calling the police out instead. She waits for Jim to get back from his book tour. She talks about how she doesn't trust the authorities.
She's a cop guard. She'll go to the feds.
Well, would that be so bad?
What are you talking about? I mean, how can you say that? You who thinks our government won't be completely satisfied until we all glow in the dark?
Honey, all I meant
I
was
found
that
this
we-
amazing thing, and you want me to turn it over to them? Guard. They will come here with trucks filled with barbed wire and men with guns, and they'll gag us, Guard.
Ever since the assassination of JFK, which was an interesting reference because for me at least, it reminded me of how formative that historical event was for the American people and for King himself. And I'm excited for when I get around to reviewing 11/22/63. I've already mentioned that Peter the Beagle was a very ageing dog, very frail. So Bobby is surprised to say the least when the cataract in his eye seemingly has cleared up overnight.
So it's not my imagination, right?
The vision in his right eye does seem to be returning.
His appetite comes back even though he doesn't have any teeth left. His fur gets its younger colouring back. Like, he jumps up to collect the mail. He's acting like a puppy. Peter seems to be doing the, like, Benjamin Button de-aging. It's as if touching the metal spaceship was like rubbing a genie's lamp. Bobby had just been worrying about how old her dog was getting, and now he's no longer old. He's as fit as when he was a puppy. But I think for us reading the book, we've got that very sort of Faustian instinct. It's nice that her beagle has his youth back, but at what cost? Why would this seemingly random spaceship do something nice for her? What does it want in return? Bobby is in so much disbelief, she takes Peter to the vet, who agrees that his cataract has got better. But then bedlam ensues.
Why don't you get your dog out of here? Okay, let's go.
All the other pets in the waiting room seem to hate Peter for no reason. He's always been a good-natured dog, but now Bobby has to restrain him. He's full of hate now, which is completely out of character. They get home, and once again, Bobby gives in to her urge to dig up more of the metal. She touches it again, and this time she feels the vibration go all the way through her body. She's so spooked. She goes back indoors. A storm is coming, so she cuddles Peter at night, realising that there's a very peculiar greenish light that's shining out of what's left of his cataract. And she wonders what this is, and if this is what enraged the other animals at the vet. Was Peter deliberately concealing that light from her so that she wouldn't realise? It's all very mysterious at this point. We don't know yet. This is when the narrative shifts. We leave Bobby in Haven and we go to our second main character, which is Jim Gardner, or Gard for short, who is currently on a poetry tour in New England. Gard is an alcoholic.
I haven't had a drink in about a year now. Not that I don't want one all the time. The hell I don't. The thing with me and booze is that I basically have a bad containment system. You know, it's like there's this technician in here somewhere that should have been fired like a long time ago.
So most of this storytelling is told in fragments due to his inebriation with his friend Ron Cummings, who's also a poet. Patricia McArdle is the sort of lead of this caravan of poets who are going around New England. But she reluctantly gives Gard, despite not liking him since he's notorious for his alcoholism, she gives him a job in this troupe. And 8 years ago we find out that he was so drunk that he shot his wife Nora. He sort of shot her through the cheek and she survived, but they divorced. Gard agrees to join the caravan, he needs the money, and he likes to annoy Patricia. He suffers from headaches, nosebleeds. It seems to be a combination of his drinking, but we also find out that he has this steel plate in his left temple because he injured himself in a skiing accident when he was 17, and so he has this metal plate in his head that gives him headaches.
Oh, damn.
What the hell was that?
No, that was me. Yeah, you see this?
Yeah. Did you get in a fight?
Yeah. There's a giant pine.
Wow, how did it happen?
I was trying to impress this pretty young thing on the slopes when I was about 17. When I woke up, they filled my head with the steel plate. Told me I get headaches from time to time.
Headaches? My God, you're lucky to be alive.
Yeah, that's what they said.
When he gets to the event, he reads this poem that he wrote for when he first met Bobby in Utica, and it's so moving that he gets the most applause of any poet there. The audience loves him.
After all these questions without answers and dreams without substance, I journeyed home. One more mile. Just one last mile. And there you were.
Even though he's distracted by this unmistakable voice in his head, he can tell Bobby is in danger. Again, it's that theme of telepathy. He can sense that something's wrong with her. Now, we get to the after party, and this scene is pure anarchy. It's so well done. King illustrates a very nightmarish picture of Guard on a bender before getting blackout drunk. He has all the typical hallmarks of drunkenness that still feel very personal, very real when you acknowledge that King also battled with alcohol through the 80s as well. I did enjoy how Guard reflects on writers in general being freeloaders who will like scrounge off a hotel and buffet for whatever freebies they can get. Like, even though at this point Stephen King in his career was very successful, you can see that he hasn't lost his appreciation for aspiring writers out there who can barely afford to make rent but still pursue their passion of writing. Like, even in this bleak novel, we see his love for the craft and his support for anyone in the literary community as a whole, and I think that shows the depth of his character in real life. But I digress. Guard, confrontational, paranoid, thinks everyone's talking about him. He nicknames this guy Argle Bargle.
What's his name again? No, don't tell me. It's that sound you make when you gargle. It's... That's it, isn't it? Argle Bargle?
Well, Arberg, actually.
No, Argle Bargle. Argle Bargle sounds so much better, don't you think?
And then will not stop laughing at how funny he thinks that joke is because he's very, very drunk. He gets violent and very passionate because this man called Ted, who works on nuclear power plants, he's sort of looking at it through rose-tinted glasses. And I suppose since it's the late 80s, we get a feel for King's distaste over the Cold War and nuclear energy, because this is like fresh off of Chernobyl and the de-escalation of the sort of arms race. Guard, in his drunken stupor, sort of lists off statistics and figures about how many children die of leukemia because of radiation.
At Chernobyl, they kill kids. Did you know that? Little 9-year-olds, the ones in utero. Isn't that right, Mr. Kilowatt?
I'm gonna fix you.
Oh, Patricia. Really? Well, I've been waiting to be fixed by you for years. Shall we maybe go upstairs or just give everybody a treat and do it right here on the rug? Huh? Come on.
I'm going to see to it that you'll never work again, you drunken, contentious, worthless... Oh!
Here.
Hey, you.
Hey!
And how toxic nuclear waste is poisoning the American people. It's very intense, this political diatribe. It goes on for pages and pages, and everyone at the party is upset. Ted's wife is crying, Patricia's yelling. God, they try to get him to leave, but it gets much worse. He, like, jabs the Argle Bargle guy in the chest, and then he has a heart attack. He also chases Ted with an umbrella.
Hey. Caramba! Hey, come on. You stupid ass! Andale!
Stop this! Somebody help me! Help me!
Is that all you can say, Mr. Power Man, Mr. Kilowatt? You nuking SOB.
Hey, you gotta bug out of here. The ladies called the cops.
Yeah, oh God, I shouldn't have done that.
What, hit him?
No, open the umbrella in the house is bad luck.
Goodbye, my friend.
Bye, sir.
Goodbye. If you remember nothing else in this world, remember this. God hates a coward.
Because he is very drunk. Guard doesn't even leave the party until his friend Ron tells him that the police are coming. I think what makes this whole scene so tragic is that Guard was the most celebrated poet at the event. Like, he's not untalented, but because of his addiction, people at the party don't remember him for his amazing poetry and his creativity. They remember him for this, his debauchery, this speech that he gives about nuclear energy. It's very eloquent, but because he's like a drunken mess, nobody will listen to him or take him seriously.
I pay you to read new poetry, not old stuff. When's the last poem you wrote that got published? When's the last poem you wrote that was any good? You may fool them, but you don't fool me. You're nothing but a drunk gardener. Always were, always will be.
He's just this crazy man who shot his wife and still won't give up the bottle. And I think in this characterisation, we see King's inner dialogue. We see the turmoil behind the writer around being seen in the same way that God is being seen right now. Like, God admits that all of his recent poetry is rubbish. His latest work has been rejected by 5 different publishers.
Old poem. I mean, let's be real here. I haven't written anything worth crap in years. Years.
Drinking has very much ruined him. And this whole time, the narrative is just dripping with King's own anxiety about wanting to be clean, knowing that if he doesn't get sober soon, his legacy as a horror writer, as a writer in general, could be in jeopardy. He's created for himself this, you know, monument, this legacy that could fade into nothing. And God keeps getting criticised for bringing politics into his poetry. And again, that felt very much like King internalising his critics, seeing how substance abuse has changed things. I think King's always had a political subtext in his novels, but it's clear that he thinks all of his activism for social change, it loses its impact. It becomes hollow if he doesn't break free of this stigma of being an addict. You know, he's scared of transforming from the poet that makes everybody cry and applaud into this drunken maniac that yells about politics, because nobody takes that man seriously. And I think today King has come out on the other side and is a very active liberal in the world who is taken seriously. But yeah, God wakes up on a beach.
What about... What did I do this time? Huh? Bobby. Bobby!
He's lost all of his possessions except his unpublished poetry. He's got a splitting headache, no recollection of what he did the night before. I think that's the real horror as well, because when you do a bad thing, there's culpability, there's guilt. But this is almost like a werewolf turning back into a man after full moon. God doesn't feel any remorse because he doesn't even know what he did the night before. He probably didn't remember shooting his wife years ago when he did that because he was so drunk. It would have been told to him the next day. At this point, God is feeling very low. He contemplates drowning himself in the sea. Mental illness does often plague alcoholics, so this depressive episode was very real and very traumatic to read. But then he sort of gets the feeling again that Bobby's in danger, and after calling her phone, he gets no answer. On the 4th of July, he decides to go back to Haven to check up on her.
Thanks for the ride. Jack Kimball, my name. Jack.
Alright, so God comes back to Haven, and I think this is where the book jumps into crazy. Not to say there haven't been strange incidents already, but here is the point where it's piled on thick, and you're like, oh, this is a sci-fi book. This book is out there. It's wild. So God hitchhikes back in an effort to save Bobby from whatever predicament his intuition tells him she's got herself into. We've not seen Bobby for about 80 pages since she found the spaceship, so we are also in the dark about what she's been up to. Have there been any new developments? Yes, there have been a few. Guard arrives at the farm, and immediately it's like, oh no. It's only been 3 weeks since he left for his poetry tour, but somehow she's emaciated, she's wasted away, she looks severely malnourished. He compares her to Karen Carpenter, who famously died from anorexia. And it's really vivid how King is able to describe her body. It's very macabre, all of her bones showing through her skin. It must be like a special interest of King's, since we'll see a lot more of it when I get round to reviewing Thinner. He wants to call the hospital immediately because she looks like she's about to die. She's so skinny. But stranger still, she threatens him. She's like, if you call the ambulance, I'll kick you out of the house. We're over. And she's the only reason he didn't kill himself. So, you know, he plays along. She encourages him to look around the house, and oh boy, what does he find when he looks around the house? There's batteries, wires, DIY assemblies. The water heater has like a small orb of energy burning like a little green sun. She's actually invented an energy source that's so efficient that it could power all 3 local towns by itself.
Bobby!
She's upgraded their tractor, the Tomcat, into an airborne monstrosity. The list goes on and on of all these newfangled inventions. He also finds the manuscript for the book that she was working on. Remember how she was agonising over this book? She hadn't even started it. Well, now it's finished, over 400 pages long. It's called The Buffalo Soldiers, which really made me think of Bob Marley. It's beautifully detailed, like the events leading up to Bleeding Kansas. This book, God only reads 40 pages, but he can already tell it's the best thing she's ever written. How did she write so quickly? How did she write 400 pages in 3 weeks? He tries to go to sleep and has a couple of nightmares. The first one is, it takes him back to like his traumatic skiing accident, but now the people he assaulted at the after party when he was drunk, those are now the victims in the skiing accident. Like Argle Bargle guy, he tells him that he died of his heart attack and it's his fault. He invited God into his home and he killed him as a guest. Meanwhile, Ted's face like melts with radiation poisoning. It's all very graphic and terrifying. I think King likes to draw similarities between aliens and radioactivity because radiation, especially in the 20th century when it wasn't completely understood, it does have this otherworldly impact of being on Earth for millions of years, buried underground, having more power than we can comprehend. There is something very alien about radiation. His second nightmare is to do with Bobby. He sees like green light beams shooting out of her eyes like lasers. It's reminiscent of what Peter the Beagle was doing earlier. Guard finally wakes up. He makes breakfast for Bobby, since she's pathologically skinny, but she has an appetite, she eats it all. This is also when he discovers all her inventions and sort of makes the connections as to why she's so underweight. He compares her to Thomas Edison, which didn't age well because Thomas Edison was a fraud, but he explains how between inventing the light bulb and the phonograph, Edison would get so swept up in his own intellect, so passionate with inventing things, that he'd forget to eat, drink, wash, clothe himself, etc. And that's what's happened here with Bobby. She's been doing all of these great things, not worrying about her own biological needs, you know. And their interactions are very funny at this breakfast table because he's still reeling from his hangover, and so he's very slow, his thoughts, like he can't solve problems, but she's actually made him worse. Like he really wants a drink and she's talking so quickly, because she's so cerebral and eccentric. It's like she's on uppers and he's on downers.
You'll understand better once you see it and you feel it.
Hey, what do you want?
Euphoria. A miracle.
It's very comical. What he's most shocked about, probably since he's also a writer, how could she write her best book in less than 3 weeks? This, again, feels very tongue-in-cheek, and I like the way Stephen King does this, because he's famous for being one of the most prolific writers out there. He's written so much, and yet the quality rarely dips below what you expect of him. For decades now, people have speculated how he does it, and this conversation felt very meta. It was sort of King giving us a cheeky wink and being like, oh, how did Bobby write one of her best works, 400 pages in less than 3 weeks, you know? It was a jab at his own constant readers. Bobby explains that she's built a typewriter that's able to scribe her thoughts into a manuscript, and that she can even read some of other people's thoughts with the typewriter. Guard is rightly very sceptical, but from the breakfast table she easily writes her thoughts to paper, and even some of Guard's thoughts. It's very eerie because he's been debating to himself if he should just leave her. So the fact that she knows this and how disgusted he was by her appearance, it's so invasive and disturbing that she already knows all of that and just chooses not to say anything. Like, she tells him the Tommyknockers are this breed of aliens that crash-landed on Earth and they died millions of years ago, and they've given her this power, and that if he goes outside and touches the spaceship, he'll feel its vibrations and he'll get the power too.
Tommyknockers knocking at the door.
It kind of reminds me of, there's an old episode of Doctor Who where it was just before they got rid of David Tennant, like Donna Noble, his companion, she touches his severed hand and like absorbs some of its DNA, and she becomes like part human, part Gallifreyan Time Lord, like part alien. And so she has these superhuman abilities, but Guard is very suspicious. She's telling him all, like, she also lies, she leaves out details. Like, she says Peter the Beagle died of old age, but it doesn't quite ring true. Like, she can't tell him what really happened. And we know at this point Peter was aging backwards, so he couldn't have died of old age. And the fact that he's gone missing, and these aliens don't want Guard to know, and they're using Bobby like a puppet, if they can twist her arm around her back like that to lie about her own dog's disappearance, what else can they do?
He's dead. Just laying on the porch and just wasn't moving.
Oh, God.
He seems so much better.
Where is he?
when I buried him out back.
Buried him? Already? Bobby?
Okay.
Okay.
And it's that morbid curiosity that's very exciting. I think the Tommyknockers are like a clever allegory for sort of Stephen King's relationship with cocaine, because Bobby was stuck in a rut. Her writing career wasn't going anywhere. And now, thanks to these supernatural forces, she's writing faster and better than ever before. But she doesn't appreciate yet the hold that these aliens have over her. To Guard, it's quite obvious because he's looking at it from outside of the situation, but she's so wrapped up in it that she sees the progress and just assumes that the end justifies the means. And I think for this reason and a few others, it's easily one of King's most personal novels. It's so visceral because even though it features spaceships and aliens, like, it's very high concept, but they're just symbols, like they're stand-ins for King's complex relationship with his writing and how substance abuse has affected him. And I think that's why this novel is easily discounted when actually, for me, it's one of the top ones. So now Guard has a very important choice to make. Bobby's made it very clear, like it or not, she's gonna dig up the rest of that spaceship. She wants to get down to the hatch so that she can go inside the spaceship and see what's down there. Guard doesn't know it yet, but if he decides he wants no part of this and then just leaves Haven, he won't get that chance. Bobby will kill him. She will shoot him with a shotgun because the Tommyknockers do not want any loose ends. The Tommyknockers can't risk the general public finding out about their spaceship.
What are you kids doing here? You shouldn't be alone in the woods. Let's go call your dad. He'll come pick you up.
At first, Guard suggests getting in touch with an Air Force base, but they quickly agree that if the government gets involved, Haven will be evacuated. Everyone in the town will be killed to cover it up. Their anti-establishment mindset, it was very reminiscent of Firestarter. And at one point they even reference the shop, which is the villains in Firestarter, the establishment that chases Charlie McGee and her dad. So I thought that was, again, a very fun wink. Guard spends a lot of time debating with himself about the ethics of this whole arrangement. And it was interesting to see him thinking out loud because, similar to King, he's a very liberal thinker, so he appreciates the positive change that could come from aliens. Like, he hasn't stopped complaining about the dangers of nuclear energy. And here we have Bobby Anderson, who's invented a renewable energy source that could easily replace power plants overnight. The problem is that Guard feels old. He feels very old. It's easy to protest and get behind radical ideas when you're young, but now that he's this alcoholic, nearly 40 divorcee with no job, he doesn't want to get tangled up with these crazy inventions and spaceships and Tommyknockers. And so in spite of this inner conflict, he knows that Bobby will die without his support. And so even though he doesn't agree with any of this, she's the only person left in the world that he really cares about. So he sort of takes a leap of faith and agrees to do things her way. They go down to the crash site so that she can show him the ship for the very first time. Similar to all the Cold War influences in this book, there's a lot of space conspiracy ideas. Like, they never mention Area 51, but the spaceship itself is a stereotypical flying saucer. It's very on the nose. They speculate about what other extraterrestrial sightings might have been covered up by the government. Bobby also cites a few of Stephen King's contemporaries, because while God was away, she did some background reading. She read some Dean Koontz, she read some Peter Straub. Again, King doesn't have an ego. He gives other horror writers their flowers for, you know, acting as muses to his creation of this story, at least. And for Peter Straub as well, they've collaborated. They wrote Talisman and Black House together, so it's nice to see that camaraderie, that they can support one another and not see each other as rivals. Guard's very hesitant to touch the spaceship, and rightly so. There are moments when Bobby doesn't act like her usual self. You know, she says things that are hurtful. She pulls certain facial expressions that the old Bobby would never do. Even though he has his reservations about it, he still touches it. And since Bobby saved him from suicide, he kind of feels obliged to her and knows that she'll die if she's left to her own devices, because she just won't eat. Now, what none of us are realising at this point is, because of that metal plate in the side of his head that you mentioned earlier, that Chekhov's gun, the plate actually acts as a buffer against the vibrations of the spaceship. So when he touches the spaceship, he doesn't succumb to the Tommyknockers. He doesn't succumb to the Tommyknockers. He's immune. And that's why she also can't read his thoughts that well.
What, after everything we've been through and everything you're sorry.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what happened. I had this little success thing. I mean, you weren't there to share it with me. I just didn't have any... Come on, say something.
You go to hell.
And this puts the Tommyknockers on edge, because if he can't be controlled, then he's a loose cannon. And we can see that even though he's on side, Bobby is constantly, throughout this story, contemplating his murder. And that's scary, because the human side of Bobby loves God, but she's losing that side, and the alien side wants him gone. And we can see how they're manipulating her, and they can see right through, because God, the way that his relationship works with alcohol is the same way the Tommyknockers have manipulated Bobby. And he tells her, you're being driven, you need to be careful. And what's even stranger is how Bobby is self-aware of her plight. Like, she's being exploited by these aliens. And she describes herself to God as an idiot savant.
They're turning you into Einstein, huh?
Well, no, not Einstein exactly, because Einstein knew things. I don't know anything. I have no idea how I got the hot water heater to work. I just knew as I was doing it, everything.
Like, in the moment, she knows how to invent these machines, but the moment it's done, she forgets all that insight, once they don't want her to have it anymore. And she regresses to a state, like, resembling Alzheimer's. She doesn't even remember where she's been. They go to sleep. God has another nightmare. This time he's approaching the shed window, because the shed will become a recurring symbol in this story. There's a terrible green light shining out of the window. It's very menacing. And when he finally looks through the window, his head explodes. And then he wakes up. So what happened next? I would describe as a lot of filler. This book is definitely longer than it needs to be. We've gone from spending the whole novel with Bobby and Guard, and then them together, to now anything but our two main characters. And to be honest, I would have preferred it if the whole book was just them. If it was just those two characters. We get a history lesson on the town of Haven. The salient part was that it changed names 4 times since its inception. I think King's making a statement about the philosophy of colonialism because of America itself being a former colony. Like, what makes someone own the land? Because each new group of settlers have changed the name for Haven.
In my day, we called it Big Engine Woods, but it's called Burning Woods now. But no matter what it's called, there's magic there.
But all the while, these Tommyknocker aliens have been sleeping on that same land for millions of years in their spaceship. So one could argue that the humans are the invaders that are trespassing on land that actually belonged to the Tommyknockers. And the idea that the woods themselves were previously called Big Engine Woods after Native Americans, but are now called Burning Woods, it's that whole idea of ownership. We also start to see the influence of the Tommyknockers on other townspeople. For me, this felt a bit too similar to Salem's Lot, where you sort of see the vampires disseminate through this small town until everybody's been affected in some way. I don't think it was necessary to involve so many different characters. I would have much preferred the whole thing just be about the drama of, like, trying to keep this relationship between Bobby and Guard, you know, civil. Instead, we go to Becca and Joe Paulson. He's the mailman. Bobby knows through her telepathy that he's having an affair.
She's much harder on me than old Charlie Esterbrook, for sure.
Yeah, will you tell her for me that Becca Paulson likes her husband home for dinner?
Yeah, honey, I will. Honey, I will. I gotta go now.
Becca is manipulated by the Tommyknockers.
About Joe, for one thing, and his infidelities?
He's having an affair.
You got it. I mean, he's been putting it to that hussy down at the post office just about every lunch hour. And around quitting time, too.
Well, what am I gonna do?
What are you gonna do? Hey, why don't we ask our contestants? Okay, ladies, I want you to put yourself in Becca's shoes. What would you do?
Kill him. Kill him. Kill him.
Well, there you have it, Becca. It's unanimous.
Kill him.
Who pretend to be the voice of Jesus, and they tell her to build a crazy contraption on the Sony TV.
I'm just no good at this. I'm too clumsy. But what if there's some other explanation for the lipstick?
What if indeed? I mean, what if you got it throwing that hussy down in a giant pile of circulars? What then?
I have to do something about it.
Yeah, you are.
So that when her husband gets home from work and turns on the TV, he is electrocuted and killed.
That's it. Good night. Good day.
The ensuing house fire also kills Becca. Meanwhile, Nancy Voss, the woman at the post office that Joe is having an affair with...
Good. Then hop on in and let's see what we can catch.
The Tommyknockers have inspired her to build this rather elaborate machine that sorts all the mail into its designated streets.
What is this?
My invention.
Wow. What does it do?
It sorts the first-class mail.
No.
Watch this.
Come on. Are you... Look at this little flag. I love it. Wow. You
That's
gotta
Haven
be
Village.
kidding me.
RFD1 Dairy Road.
That's too much. How did you think of this?
It just came to me. Smart, huh?
Wow. It's not bad. Not for a woman. It's not bad at all.
So everyone's sort of presenting like Bobby Anderson. This whole side plot was actually written as a short story called The Revelations of Becca Paulson, which you can read in King's second short story anthology, Skeleton Crew, which some people think is his best one. While working on the Tommyknockers, he adjusted this short story slightly and then added these three characters to Haven. And so it's interesting to see how he sort of makes bridges between his works.
But Joe... You got it? But Joe...
Do you got it?
But Joe...
But. See, I never want to hear that word again. I never want to hear but again, because but is what a goat has for brains. And but is for the small-minded people in this small-minded town. Bye.
And these seem to be the main gifts of the Tommyknockers: the ability to invent new machines and the ability to read minds. Both of these gifts are transient, so in the moment they make sense, but after the fact the person has no clue how they did it. I do like the idea that these aliens are preying on the tendencies of human nature, because your typical person loves gossip. So to have the power to read people's minds, that gives them the satisfaction of knowing secrets in their neighbours' lives. We then get to Hilly Brown.
Oops. Damn it, Hilly!
He's a 10-year-old boy and he's obsessed with magic.
30 new tricks. Hours of fun for the young prestidigitator?
That's magician in plain English.
The Tommyknockers encourage him to build a contraption that makes things magically disappear. He demonstrates it to his family, but is then horrified when he makes his younger brother David disappear.
Billy! Off you go. You know that you can, because I learned this trick from the Tommyknocker man. Presto, Majesto, disappear.
Where nobody can find him. This, for me, felt very repetitive, because the older brother and the younger brother, one of them going missing, that's the same recycled plot device as Bill and Georgie in It, which is the same recycled plot device as Danny and Ralphie in Salem's Lot. I don't know what Stephen King's obsession is with one brother going missing and the other brother feeling responsible, when we as the reader know that it's a supernatural villain who's abducted the other brother. The only thing that made it interesting this time is that we have the nightmarish image of 5-year-old David suffocating on an alien planet trillions of light years away from Earth. Like, his whole family have started a search party for this little boy, when Hilly knows, but no one will believe him, that his brother is dying out in the far reaches of space on a planet called Altair 4 with a black sky and no oxygen. Like, it's very dramatic.
Presto, change your return. Presto, change your return. Please, God. I'm sorry. You can have all my G.I. Joes. Anything, I swear it. Just let him come back.
What's wrong, son?
I'll do anything. Just bring him back. Bring him back now.
Dear God, what does he mean? Who's he talking to?
I don't know. Hilly, you stop fooling around and get Davy back. Now.
I'm trying, but I can't. I'm trying, okay?
Okay, where is he, Tommy? Where did he go?
I don't know. I don't know where things go when they stop being here.
Healy becomes hysterical. He promises David all his G.I. Joe action figures if he comes back, and yells that same thing on a continual loop until he passes out and forgets everything. Like, it is rough.
Billy, help me. Davy? It's cold and dark, and I want to come home, Ellie. Where are you, Davy? Where are you? With the Tommyknockers. Help me. How?
Leading the search party is Haven's constable, Ruth McCausland. King gives us her entire life story. but most of it isn't particularly relevant. My three main takeaways was that, one, she's the closest thing to a hometown hero. Everybody knows her, everybody loves her, and it's justified because she's like a great person. She's a strong woman with fairness to be a good constable.
Mrs. Paulson answers all the important police calls. Don't you, Mrs. Paulson? Right.
Yes, I do.
Okay, come on in here. Let's go see the schoolroom.
2, her husband died over a decade ago from a brain tumour, leaving her childless and a widow. And 3, she has a very impressive yet very scary collection of premium dolls. Now, at this point, the aliens have really taken over Haven. It's much faster than if you compare this to Salem's Lot, where the vampires spend most of the novel having to convert people. Whereas in the Tommyknockers, it happens almost overnight. And I think this is partly due to there being no physical requirement. If you're a vampire, you have to bite your victim. But in this book, they just take over your brain while you're sleeping. In that sense, it's very similar to The Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, but also the way the whole town becomes this hive of telepathic aliens, and because the town is so small and suburban and it's out of the way, it's also a bit like The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. It's got a bit of that going on as well.
The becoming?
Yes.
Are you ready to become one voice that will soon be free?
Yes.
Yes. One great, powerful voice that will know more.
Yes.
Do more.
Yes.
Be more.
Yes.
One voice.
Yes.
One voice.
One voice. One voice. One voice. One voice. One voice. One voice. One voice.
This whole time period is known as the Dance of Untruth, and it officially begins after the disappearance of David Brown, because in each of the townspeople there's like an internal battle between their old human self and their new alien self. Those two minds are sort of battling for dominance, because the human minds want to make an effort to search for little David.
She's missing! First Davy, and now Ruth. Can't the police do anything? What good are you?
Honey, he's doing everything he can. It's not his fault.
But the alien minds, they're completely aware that that little boy isn't missing. He's dying on another planet. So for some people, the battle in their heads is too much, and they devolve into schizophrenia and madness. But for most of Haven's population, the alien mind wins, of course, and starts to take over the body as well, in a process that's known as the becoming.
You'll become. Become what? Whatever this thing is making you, whatever the hell it's doing to you, it's not good, Bobby. Don't interfere, Ruth. Just go home and dream. Just dream of becoming like the rest of us.
Women across town have developed very heavy periods. Even the postmenopausal women, even the prepubescent girls, they're bleeding quite heavily. Everyone's experiencing waves of genius. There's nausea, there's vomiting, there's nosebleeds, tooth loss.
Oh, hi.
It's very gross. Ruth manages to suppress her alien mind, I guess just because of her strength of will. But all of the other people around her can tell that she's fighting back because of that telepathy. and they keep giving her these grins that show their missing teeth, like telling her to sort of just give up and leave town. I think it's a nice way of showing how much everyone in Haven worshipped Ruth when they were still human, because even though the aliens know that killing the constable is necessary, the human minds revere her so much that everyone keeps giving her like ample chances to escape. They're like, no, leave town, it's not safe here, leave town.
Promise me anything you want, you stupid bitch, but you're never gonna find him.
What did you say?
That we really appreciate you coming in here. It really means a lot to us.
Knowing that the humans have too much loyalty to Ruth, the Tommyknockers take control of like her doll collection, which is another very freaky moment.
Too late, bro.
Ruth goes home after searching for David all day, and her dolls just start talking to her. And they have told her that David is gone forever, that the town is hopeless, like she needs to give up and stop trying to save people. Ruth is horrified, don't really blame her. These dolls have helped her through the loss of her husband, and now they're projecting that same swampy green light that is now synonymous with the Tommyknockers. That's why I came decked out in green for this, because similar to how balloons in It are sort of like Pennywise's calling card, the green light is very like, oh, Tommyknockers are near. It's that kind of symbol, that motif. Ruth doesn't give in. She fights the Tommyknockers at every opportunity. She even then tries to escape Haven, but when she gets to the town border, the aliens have put up an invisible barrier that sort of pushes you back into the town. I think that's when it dawns on her that she can either go mad or die sane, so she chooses the latter. And I like this idea of like a sort of barrier, the theme of containment. I was wondering, like, when I get round to Under the Dome, if it's that similar sort of concept. She also notices that in addition to tooth loss, lots of townspeople who were previously known for having blue eyes now have hazel eyes. I thought this could have been explored more because it's only mentioned once, and I thought it was a nice touch because hazel eyes being a hallmark of a Tommyknocker, it not only subverts the evil connotations around blue eyes, but also as someone who has hazel eyes, I appreciate the inclusion. I think it's symbolic because hazel itself is like a marbling of brown and green. And so it's that inner conflict between the human side, the brown eyes, and the alien minds, that terrible green. And so I think hazel makes a lot of sense. Ruth turns each of her dolls into a miniature bomb that she packs them all up, she takes them to the town hall, and when the clock strikes 3:05 in the afternoon, there is a giant explosion and the loud blast of green fire. The town hall becomes like a giant brick rocket that explodes in midair. Now, this was a very clear jab at the Tommyknockers because they're trying to keep a low profile. They don't want outsiders coming into town and discovering the spaceship. But Ruth is focused on drawing attention. She wants the state police from outside Haven to come investigate. And so the aliens are furious with her. And of course this explosion completely kills Ruth instantly. It dismembers her. You know, there's bits and pieces of her everywhere. Haven, 2 police officers called Bent and Jingles come to town to investigate. And this is where the Tommyknockers are very clever.
Come in.
Butch, there you are.
Things are just fine. It's all been a wild goose chase for nothing.
You mean it, boss? You want us to call up the search?
I'll explain it to you when you get back to Derry. 10-4 and out.
How'd I do?
You could have been on Star Search. Hell, you could have won it.
You really think so?
Yes, I do.
10-4 and out.
They have invented a 3D hologram of the building so that they can project it over the bomb site, so someone visiting the town, it looks as if nothing's happened. And they even edit the photo of the clock tower so that it reads 3:05. And the 2 police officers, they see the bomb site and Ruth's severed arm, so they've actually come before this has happened and they know too much. So Beach Jernigan, who's a man who was saved from lung cancer by the Tommyknockers, he intercepts their police car just before it gets into Derry and makes them disappear. You know, they're also off to Altair 4. This causes a bit of a domino effect though, because 2 police officers vanishing in the same week that a little boy goes missing, that's a very noticeable conspiracy. One that is picked up by David's grandfather, Ev Hillman. Much like Jim Gardner, Ev Hillman also has a metal plate in his head from World War II. So he's equally immune to the Tommyknockers' mind control, which makes him dangerous. He's very guilty about what happened to his grandson, and he spends most of his time at the hospital sort of staying with Hilly Brown, who at this point has collapsed into a sort of coma.
What's causing this coma?
It isn't coma. It's shock.
Well, whatever you call it. Slipping away is what it comes right down to.
Mr. Hillman, what have his parents been feeding him?
Regular food. Why do you ask?
He's lost several of his permanent teeth.
Hilly is almost catatonic, like he's missing several teeth. He tells his granddad that David is on Altair 4, which Ev then sees in his dreams as like a black wasteland planet where David can't even breathe. Ev might not know what to do, but he's one of the only people who can still do something, so he knows he has to do some sort of plan. He has to get to the bottom of this. For me, this is where the story really amps up in suspense, because Ev Hillman, he hatches a plan to get photographic proof of the spaceship in the woods so that he can then expose Haven to the outside world. He manages to convince Butch Dugan, who's a police officer and close friend of Ruth's, to come with him.
All sorts of special things. Men murdering whole families and then killing themselves. It's like this big jigsaw puzzle. Once you see the pattern, you wonder how you could ever miss it.
And you're telling me all these are connected? Impossible.
Yeah, any normal person would say that. Most people see only as far as the horizon.
Using the event of Ruth's funeral as an opportunity, because all the townspeople will be attending the funeral to keep up appearances, so the flying saucer will be completely unguarded. And I think this was what was so clever about Ruth sacrificing herself. Because she was so influential, the Tommyknockers have to put on a pretend funeral to keep up appearances.
I don't know if you've heard, but Ruth Merrill's missing.
Oh my God.
Because there's so many people that she knew outside of Haven who want to visit the town to pay their respects. And so the Reverend has prepared this special eulogy, and for the most part, the visitors are distracted, they don't notice anything different. And I realise again why it's so clever that the Tommyknockers put great ideas in your head, because it's almost preying on the American dream. Like, every member of the country has that individualistic need to do something that sets them apart from the pack. They want to be that person that's done something nobody's ever done before. So to be a success in their own unique way, the aliens are able to take advantage of their narcissism. These visitors are so hung up on their ideas, they don't notice how none of the townspeople look like they're sick with grieving, or how the clock tower looks like it's been drawn on. Like, everyone in this town is missing teeth. How are they not noticing that none of the Tommyknockers even thought to invent, like, holographic dentures or something? Because that would be very suspicious. Like, how is this reverend, when he's giving a eulogy, not showing everyone his gums when he opens his mouth and none of his teeth are there? I did find that strange. Meanwhile, Ev and Butch have rented a Cherokee Jeep. They are driving around the Albion-Haven border, trying to get as close to the crash site as possible before actually getting into the town. Ev has brought an oxygen mask to protect Butch from the spaceship's fumes, explaining that since Ev has a metal plate, he's unaffected, but also he has a handgun and a flare gun, with his last resort being to start a forest fire to draw outside attention to the spaceship. The Tommyknockers are the perfect foil to American individualism. They think with one mind, they all have the same goal. They sense very quickly that outsiders are snooping around near the spaceship, and they panic because they are miles away hosting this pretend funeral. Not that Ruth isn't dead, but it's pretend because they killed her. They're not sorry about it, they're not in grieving. They almost seem to want to rub it in that they killed the town's hero. Like, these aliens, they have a real ugly side to them. We find out later as well, they're very childish and very pointed with how they do things. And it ends up being their undoing. A few Tommyknockers slip out of the funeral. They grab some guns, they race into the woods to stop Ev and Butch. Interestingly, they left Jim Gardner at the farm in his drunken stupor, so he actually sends a distress signal to Bobby, letting her know that Ev and Butch have reached the old Garrick farm, which was interesting because Jim, like Ev, is immune to the influence of the Tommyknockers, but because he loves Bobby and he's been helping them, he doesn't mind being this informant that sort of grasses on the humans. Like, he might be becoming an alien, she might be becoming an alien, but she's deliberately kept him around due to still having feelings for him, and also because he's kind of useful. But she also, like, has tinges of regret at the prospect of giving up her human side. Like, the book constantly speculates at the prospect of her redemption arc. Like, will she be able to give up Bobby Anderson and embrace the Tommyknocker? I guess King is sort of picking out the major flaw in collectivistic culture, that if even just one person feels like an outlier, then that weak link can ruin the whole chain. And I think that's very telling when we see what happens to Bobby Anderson later. Ev takes several photos of the spaceship, but then the Tommyknockers arrive and apprehend them. As they can't read Ev's mind, he has the advantage of being unpredictable. These aliens are very out of touch with human nature and how impulsive we can be. Ev shoots Beach Jernigan with the flare gun, killing him almost instantly. A fight breaks out. Ev and Butch are outnumbered. Butch shoots Bobby in the chest and she loses a lot of blood. We don't know yet if she will survive, but she orders the other aliens to take Ev and Butch to the shed, this building that we talked about earlier that's emanating with bright green Tommyknocker light. And what happens in the shed? All will be revealed. Dun dun dun. Butch Dugan kills himself, so they set him free. He wakes up at home. The Tommyknockers have wiped his memory. All he has to hold on to is the grief and regret of losing Ruth McCausland, because he secretly loved her. So, yeah, he shoots himself in the eye. We don't know yet what's happened to Ev Hillman. More on that later. What's interesting to see, though, is how the aliens have taken over human bodies, but almost seem to have adopted certain human emotions, like hatred and fear. Since the spaceship is next to the old Garrick farm, Bobby Anderson has sort of become the leader of the whole operation. And while she's healing in the shed, the Tommyknockers fall apart a bit. We can see them like panicking at the prospect of her dying, because she's very much been the driving force behind this whole movement. And they're very scared of Jim Gardner, since that metal plate means that they have no clue how he'll behave.
The final phase. But we must be careful. Is everything in readiness?
The detour signs are up.
Anyone who makes it through or wish he didn't.
Like those two Stadies. They got a nasty surprise. 1, 2, 3. My gadget sent them to the Twilight Zone.
Zapping them wasn't necessary. In time, they would have become.
Not everyone has become.
Your man hasn't.
He will. It will happen to him.
They keep him alive to appease Bobby, but since he's a grafter and he's been working hard to excavate the spaceship...
I'll never join you, Bobby. And I'll never become.
Hey, poet. Let's see if you can dig as well as you can drink.
He's been using dynamite to speed up the process, but then as he blows it, there's an adjacent aquifer that fills the site with water, so then he has to use a pump to like suck all the water up. Jim knows what the Tommyknockers are like. He knows they're always on edge around him, and so he kind of teases them. Like, he screams quotes from Edgar Allan Poe like a crazy person, and even punches one of them in the face. He gives them a lot of pushback, and he never wonders what's happening in the shed. Like, he sees half a dozen Tommyknockers visit the shed every night, and that green light that shines out of its windows. He's very afraid. He compares it to the end of Animal Farm, when the animals sort of see the pigs in the shed plotting domination. The Tommyknockers also consider releasing David Brown to create a distraction, so that they'll have more time to find the hatch on the spaceship. If you remember, David is still suffocating on Altair 4, a storage planet that's far, far away. We learn that on Altair 4, time moves slowly, so David has actually only just got there, despite it being weeks since his disappearance at this point from Haven. The name Altair 4 itself is borrowed from the 1956 sci-fi classic Forbidden Planet, similar to how Tommyknockers is borrowed from a nursery rhyme. I don't think the aliens themselves actually care for names, but their human side sort of appreciate the labelling of it. The problem is, as more and more strange events happen in Haven, more outsiders are taking interest and wanting to explore the town. Like, the Tommyknockers have changed road signs to create detours from Haven, but then it comes out in the news that this neurosurgeon was flying a plane over Haven when suddenly his plane, like, stopped working, like the engine stopped, and he crash landed and died. Like, it's becoming very difficult to keep this spaceship quiet because it's very bloodthirsty. Guard knows the dig's going to be over once they find the shaft, and then he knows he'll be expendable. The Tommyknockers will kill him in minutes.
More wire for blasting, so I just came up to get it.
So where is it?
I was just getting it.
Just because I can't read your mind doesn't mean I don't know what you're thinking. You'd better pray nothing happens to Bobby. If something did, you'd suffer a little accident. A fatal one.
So he's questioning his options. Does he accept his part in this and die? Or does he try and escape? Does he try and stop the Tommyknockers? The ship itself, indestructible. He mentally tallies all the lives he's helped to take. Like at this point, Ruth's dead, David is missing, Jingles and Bent is missing, Butch killed himself, that pilot Bailey's just died. He feels very guilty because he has had a hand in all of their deaths. And I think this is what highlights his difference to the Tommyknockers, because the aliens are very cold and unfeeling. They have no remorse for the death that they've caused. They want to expand this carnage. They want to kill all humans. Bobby comes back after making a full recovery. Guard thought she was in a hospital in Derry. She wasn't. She was in the shed the whole time. She's lost almost all of her hair. Her skin is a very sickly, translucent colour. But Guard still loves her, and they have sex. Afterwards, Guard realises that he himself has lost a tooth. So his own immunity to the spaceship has run out, and he's starting to become one of them. While Bobby is sleeping, Guard is suspicious of Bobby's whereabouts, so he looks through her clothes hamper. And when he looks at the dress that she was wearing the day before, he finds that the dress is covered in a green slime and dog hairs from Peter the Beagle. Guard realises, oh no, she was lying about Peter all this time. She said that Peter died of old age. But if she's got tufts of his fur on the dress that she just wore, she must at least still have his body in the shed. 2 of Haven's teenagers are sent out on a trip to Derry to get some batteries. But since most of the inventions in Haven, they're fueled by like battery cells, like D's, C's, double and triple A's, the town's run out of a supply, so they need more. And we find out that around the town of Haven, the spaceship has created this hospitable biosphere, and that if the aliens are outside of Haven for too long, they die from overexposure to Earth's harmful atmosphere. And this is why the 2 teenagers who go out to look for batteries, when they come back, one's dead and the other one's blinded, because they've suffocated and hallucinated on the atmosphere. And what's really funny is while they're in Derry, one of them spots a clown staring up at them from a sewer grate. And I loved that cameo, the fact that there's a cheeky nod to Pennywise, not only because King loves to connect his stories, and it's established that Pennywise as well is an ancient cosmic being, so it makes sense in this sci-fi epic that he'd feature, you know, Pennywise the dancing clown, even if it's just brief. So I did enjoy that. Bobby also worries that if a strong wind were to blow through Haven, the biosphere from the spaceship could be dispersed enough that all of the Tommyknockers would die. She probably shouldn't have shared that with Jim, seeing as he's not an alien, but I guess it shows how much she still trusts him, not realising that she's presented him with an opportunity to kill all of them. Now, in the 3rd and final act of the novel, at long last we get an introduction to Bobby's sister, with the rather ridiculous name Anne Anderson. That name is so silly. Anne is the definition of a battle axe. She is a bully. Every single person around her, she dominates, and she revels in being able to sort of lead a room full of people, make everyone afraid of her. And I think what brings her into Haven is the death of their father. Anne wants to force Bobby to go to his funeral, and since she has a mouthful of metal fillings, she's somewhat resistant to the spaceship's influence.
What's it like, this, feeling?
It's a high. It's an incredible high. What about you? You don't feel anything?
Nothing. Not a jot, not an ounce of poetic inspiration. Nothing.
You will. It just doesn't happen all at once.
I suppose you're right. Hey, maybe it's the old plate in my head, huh?
Excuse me. Stephen King describes her bruxism at length, which I had to look up. Apparently it's gritting your teeth. From an early age, Anne's liked to grit her teeth. I think it was meant to show how similar the Tommyknockers losing their teeth are from the crazy control freaks of the human world, like Anne. Very much like the pigs in Animal Farm, these aliens consider themselves to be superior to humans. They won't admit it, but they're more similar to humans than they know. And the more they stay on Earth, the more they're turning into just despotic humans like Anne. Anne doesn't take long to find the old Garrick farm, but she's immediately perturbed by how silent the Haven Woods are, because at this point there's no birds, there's no crickets, there's just a drunk Jim Gardner passed out on the porch. He comes to and tells her to get out while she still can, but she ignores him and goes looking for Bobby. And when she finds Bobby, Bobby is naked in the house, and Anne is very scared because Bobby's transformation into a Tommyknocker is very advanced. Her skin is see-through, she's got big alien organs floating under the surface, she's shorter, wider, slimier, she has no teeth or hair left, her breasts have sort of combined into this big fleshy sack, and there's like a tangle of tentacles coming out of what used to be her vagina. It's so wonderfully insane how Bobby's described. Like, the Tommyknockers are now using flesh-coloured makeup to conceal their translucent skin, but it's getting very obvious that they're no longer human. Bobby tells Guard that her sister left Haven, but Guard later finds Anne's rented car buried in the woods, so that was another lie. Bobby must be keeping Anne with Peter in the shed. I promise we will get to what's in the shed very soon. While digging, Guard finally hits the shaft of the spaceship. They're both elated, but Bobby says that they'll come back the next day to open it and go inside the spaceship. So we've got two big reveals coming. What's in the shed? What's in the spaceship? All will be revealed. So Guard is still discontent with Bobby's lies about Peter the Beagle. Guard decides to finally investigate what's inside the shed. It's time. The big reveal. The thing we've been waiting hundreds of pages to find out. When he finally procures a key and the courage to step inside, he sees a few things. There's lots of weaponised gadgets and inventions, but something as well at the back of the room that is truly horrifying. There's a line of shower cubicles against the back wall of the shed, and in each cubicle we see Bobby's sister, Anne, we see Ev Hillman, and worst of all, Peter the Beagle. All three of them have been kept alive just about, and suspended in containers filled with a bright green fluid and a coaxial cable that connects them all, with large parts of their skulls removed and wires sticking out of their exposed brains. Guard realises now why Bobby was recovering here after she was shot. The shed is essentially a Tommyknocker accelerator. It feeds off these three hosts as organic battery sources of energy. Anne starts screaming, Ev tells Guard that they're only lucid when they're used for power, which puts them in constant agony. And poor Peter the Beagle just like whines and like kicks his legs uselessly. It's definitely a nightmarish image. After so much build-up to what was inside the shed, I was surprised that the big mystery of what happened to Peter the Beagle was just a case of enslaving their victims by turning them into batteries. It also makes me question the resourcefulness of the Tommyknockers. Like, if organic hosts are better sources of power than D-cells, why didn't they abduct more people? Like, yes, I know they wanted to avoid outside interference from journalists, so they couldn't have people outside of town go missing. But not every member of Haven needed to be a Tommyknocker. They could have easily rounded up the old, the weak, the expendable, any dogs, cats, or other pets, and made a much bigger shed with all of their bodies hooked up to it. Because I have a hard time believing that all these changes in Bobby Anderson were catalysed by just an old man, a woman, and a dog. Like, this big reveal felt a bit happenstantial to me. Like, there was so much anticipation to what was in the shed. And I feel like Stephen King didn't really know what was going to be in it and just decided in the moment that this would be it. I think what I would have preferred, since there's been so much fighting between the alien and human minds in Haven, if the shed had been like an experimental lab where they try to create a human Tommyknocker hybrid. Like, Peter the Beagle could have been the prototype, and when Guard walks into the shed, he finds like a strange, tumorous amalgam of like Bobby Anderson, her sister, Ev Hillman, Peter. Like, especially as the Tommyknockers, we've learned, can only survive within Haven due to the biosphere. Wouldn't it have made more sense if Bobby had spliced human and alien biology to create like a crossbreed that could live anywhere on Earth and like colonise the whole planet? And then like Guard runs away because the like tumour-filled chimeras just like, kill me, I'm in constant pain. Like, basically I wanted it to be more like The Thing. But that's just what I would have done. You do you, Stephen King. This book is fabulous nonetheless. So Guard's had quite enough of the shed. He runs out feeling sick, but then forgets to lock the shed back up. We get a very tense showdown as he tries to lock up the shed before the Tommyknockers get back from the spaceship. Excuse me. The disappearance of Ev Hillman has not helped Haven's notoriety one bit. Another journalist by the name of Leandro is dead set on making a name for himself by exposing the secrets of this mystery town of missing people and conspiracies. He's interviewed several relatives that live outside of Haven and found out how none of the townspeople have associated with anyone outside of Haven in the last 6 weeks. Anyone who goes near the town feels nauseous. There's vomiting, there's nosebleeds, and lost teeth. Leandro is determined to get to the bottom of this. Meanwhile, Guard reflects on how it's been 40 days and nights since he came back to Haven to help Bobby after contemplating suicide. A very biblical time period. He does love to quote lots of different books, being a writer, and he even refers to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining at one point. Again, King referencing King, being very meta, connecting all his stories together. Bobby, too, mentions in passing a weird horror writer in Maine. Another cute little Easter egg. I think the breaking point for Guard was seeing Peter the Beagle in pain. As much as he loves Bobby, there's something especially evil about torturing an innocent animal. Like, that's what convinced him that he couldn't let this carry on. I think Tommyknockers is certainly on a much larger scale compared to other King novels. What I mean is the stakes here involve world domination. and so that's a big weight on Guard's shoulders. After a lot of dilly-dallying, Bobby and Guard finally explore the hatch of the spaceship and take their first steps inside. They're both wearing gas masks to breathe because the air in this spaceship is so stale and full of like death that it would have been very toxic. But much like the shed, the contents of the spaceship is a bit of an anticlimax, although here it's intentional. The ship's interior is very minimalistic. There's half a dozen dead aliens.
Fighting or something. The ship crashed. If they're all dead, how do they speak to you?
Who have crash landed after what appears to have been a physical altercation. And I think Guard enjoys showing Bobby how these extraterrestrial beings that she's worshipped in her head by obsessing over them are no different to humans on Earth, warring over nuclear arms. Like, there's a creepy room in the spaceship that's a lot like a battery farm, with lots of, like, Tommyknockers wired up as the ship's fuel supply. But besides that, they leave the ship feeling rather disappointed. And so was I. Undeterred by his first failed attempt, John Leandro heads back into Haven, this time with a portable oxygen mask to protect himself from the biosphere. When he rents the breathing apparatus, he finds out that their last customer was none other than Ev Hillman, who never returned his gas mask, further validating Leandro's belief that something very wrong is happening in Haven. Why are so many people going missing? Upon crossing the borderline, Leandro puts on his gas mask and is feeling fine, but then the car engine fails because the Tommyknockers have set up an electromagnetic pulse, and so vehicles, unless they're rigged by the Tommyknockers, shut down quite quickly. It also turns out that all of those weaponized gadgets and robots that Guard saw in the shed have now been let loose to guard the town against outsiders interfering. Leandro refuses to retreat this time, putting himself in a 1v1 confrontation with a sentient Coca-Cola dispenser. That fires bottles of soda at him. This felt very Signature King. He's always had a penchant for sentient machinery. From Maximum Overdrive to The Mangler to Christine, he loves to show humans being tormented by their own creations. It's a bit like Frankenstein, but somehow more farcical. As you probably know, those vending machines weigh a ton. So when it charges at Leandro, it crushes him, like his skull and neck just snap very easily. And this creates more problems for the Tommyknockers, because Leandro told his boss David Bright, if I don't come back from Haven in 2 hours, get in touch with the police. And so after all the mysterious incidents around the town of Haven, this ends up being the straw that broke the camel's back. Haven is coming out of the darkness and very much into the light. It's a very similar climax for me to Firestarter, where Charlie McGee manages to sort of overcome the shop by going to the press with her story. And it's interesting because often journalism in the real world is like an evil empire. It gets vilified before twisting facts and brainwashing everyday people. But in King's earlier works, at least, the power of the press seems to stand in for the triumph of freedom of speech over evil, and how, like, the pen is mightier than the sword, all of that spiel. Like, the Tommyknockers won't get away with this because their story is literally being told to us in this book, you know? They're trying to hide this, but the truth will always get out. Following their departure from the spaceship, Guard has his final talk with Bobby, and it's very dramatic. She's sitting across from him at the dining table. She's got a photon ray gun and his old prescription bottle of Valium. She's like, look, overdose on these pills and die peacefully, or I will transport you to Altair 4. He asks her lots of sort of death row questions about the Tommyknockers. They have a final chat. She encourages him to take the pills as they talk. She even makes a Valley of the Dolls reference, which I'm a sucker for. If you watched my every book that I read in 2022, I love that book so much. I'd love a list as well of all the literary references made throughout this whole book, because our two main characters are both writers, so they're very meta with their book comparisons. They're very cultured. Bobby tells Guard that the Tommyknockers are not Einstein geniuses. They're just builders. They invent cool gadgets and they hop from planet to planet in their spaceship. We also find out that Altair 4 is one of over 90 wavelengths that they can open portals to, but they barely understand the technology behind it themselves. Guard is quite fervent and biting. He knows he's not making it out alive, so he piles it on thick. He tells Bobby how awful she is for betraying him. They're meant to be in love. For sucking the life energy out of Peter like a defenseless beagle. Like, he compares her to a vampire, and to then lie about it. He insults her whole species. He points out that they might have a high IQ, but they have no common sense.
I'm telling you, it has something to do with that thing in the woods in there. Now, I want you to help me to try to find out what it is so we can stop it, okay?
Stop it. No. No.
Like, they turn people into batteries, but if they just converted the mains to DC, that very big oversight would have let them get away with their plan. And because Bobby can now see that he's right, and that it was quite dumb of them to not make that connection, she's screaming. She's so mad at God. And I think King here is challenging how we like to sensationalise aliens. Like, if life forms ever did come down to Earth, they would be imperfect like us. They would make stupid mistakes like us. Just like these Tommyknockers. Like, they're not the divine beings that we make them out to be. Every species has its shortcomings. And the Tommyknockers are really showing their butts.
Than anything in the world, Bobby.
He helped me become. They all gave us their strength.
Not gave. Stole. You stole it. You're like a vampire. You and your precious Tommyknockers.
Shut up! Shut up!
You don't get it, do you? You don't get it? Well, take a look around! They've been giving you brain boosters, but all they're doing is fattening you up and use you all like batteries.
Shut up!
We're here, we've arrived, it's the ending of the book. If you've made it this far, I commend you. It's wild. Bobby and Guard fight over the dining table. He spills beer over her, and then she tries to shoot him with her photon gun, but she misses and sets herself on fire. And while she's burning in, like, pain, Guard sort of puts her out of her misery with a bullet from Ev Hillman's gun through her cheek. The exact same way that he shot his wife, Nora, only this time he was stone cold sober and was setting Bobby free from what the Tommyknockers had done to her. Upon killing Bobby, who from the start has been the ringleader of these aliens, the whole town is very incensed. They all want to do terrible things to Guard in revenge, and they travel at breakneck speed to the old Garrick farm, where all hell breaks loose. Guard goes to the shed and combines his brain with Ev Hillman's to bring back David Brown from Altair 4. He also haywires one of the Tommyknocker gadgets, which goes on to kill several aliens with green fire. There's explosions, there's carnage. The fire department from outside of Haven are called to deal with the forest fires. But since anyone who gets near the town border gets sick and dies when they come into Haven, the fire is allowed to get bigger and bigger. It becomes the greatest forest fire in the history of the state of Maine. The shed itself is destroyed in the chaos, which puts Anne, Ev and Peter at rest finally. They're put out of their misery, they die. Several of our named Tommyknockers are also killed by Guard. He has a toy ray gun that fires a green light and a deadly laser, and he's a wicked shot with it, despite being an alcoholic. Eventually Dick Allison is the last of the Tommyknockers, and he becomes the leader. He kills Newt with his bare hands. Bobby alluded earlier to the fact that the Tommyknockers are like children, and it's very apparent in this moment. Guard was distracted by saving David Brown. They could have got in their spaceship and escaped, but they were so consumed by their hatred that they sort of took this alcoholic underdog for granted, and they have every opportunity to get rid of him over the last 2 months. They're so frustrated at how this single man has thwarted their plans so brilliantly. And I don't blame them. I was frustrated too, because at this point, during Guard's fight with Bobby, he shot himself in the foot by mistake and shattered his ankle. And he also vomited up the Valium that she gave him, but there'd still be some in his system. It's inconceivable how quickly this dying alcoholic turns into Bruce Willis in a Die Hard film. He's kicking alien butt and saving the world. The gadgets as well feature so heavily in the last few chapters, which felt weird because the aliens are described as having claws themselves. Why did they never physically attack Guard? Why did it always have to be a vacuum cleaner with spikes or a smoke detector with a sonic boom? Why did, the aliens never get feral? They're meant to be angry. But anyways, Guard makes it to the spaceship. He enters the hatch. He puts on there's a headset that you use to operate the spaceship. And it seems to pair with him. It drains the energy of several Tommyknockers around Haven. Their brains blow out of their skulls in the process. The spaceship, after millions of years of being wedged into the Earth, it breaks free and flies off into space. And the book ends with Guard collapsing in death on the spaceship floor, smiling as he pictures this halcyon day of Bobby Anderson and Peter the Beagle. And it's sweet. There's also an epilogue that explains how the story of Haven made international news. As much as the CIA and the FBI tried to cover things up, the evidence of a flying spaceship in the air was irrefutable. So after the spaceship left Earth, the remaining Tommyknockers had no purpose left, and so some committed suicide. Others were killed by soldiers that invaded Haven, with the last stragglers being collected and experimented on by none other than the shop. King also makes a cheeky Firestarter reference about how the shop had gone up in flames thanks to a little girl. Gradually, all the Tommyknockers in the shop's headquarters die from natural selection, really, and their species on Earth, at least, is rendered extinct. No more Tommyknockers. And the final scene in the whole story shows David Brown being transported from Altair 4 to the hospital in Derry, where his brother Hilly is staying. The nurse walks in to find that Hilly's woke up from his coma and is cuddling his younger brother. They're going to share their G.I. Joe figures. It's a surprisingly wholesome ending, even if their whole family is now dead. and the town that they grew up in is a burnt-out wasteland. But at least they have each other. It's like, ah. In 1993, a television miniseries adaptation was made of the Tommyknockers, and after watching it twice, I can confirm it is a delightful train wreck. On all accounts, a terrible adaptation, but I was entertained. I would love to see a modern, updated version of the Tommyknockers on our screens. Supposedly that's in the works, so I guess we'll have to wait and see. Much like Salem's Lot, a complex, multifaceted plot that involves a whole town of characters does not translate easily into television. There were side plots that were left out, characters that were erased. The whole thing overall was oversimplified. And I think King himself has described the Tommyknockers 93 version as cheap and thrown together. It definitely feels low effort and low budget. It's very sci-fi original flick. The acting is bad.
I need some batteries.
Batteries?
Yeah, and other stuff too. I've got a list.
What's this all about?
I've come up with a new trick. I can do it at my birthday party on Saturday.
A new one, huh? Is it a good trick?
Not good. Great. The best trick anyone's ever seen. It'll make him gasp and scream and yell. A trick that they'll remember forever.
The music cues are aggressive.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ellison. Just give me another chance. I can do the multiplying coin trick.
And often louder than the dialogue in the scenes. So there are moments where you're like, what? What did they say? And it's very 90s as well. There's a lot of dead cuts that are meant to shock you, but none of the visuals are well done, so it just looks very cartoonish, very silly. It's bizarre as well that they chose to overemphasise what was left on the cutting room floor. Like Ruth McCausland, for instance, is much more tertiary in this version. Like, she doesn't blow up the town hall. They probably couldn't afford the special effects for that. Instead, she sort of just goes missing. And then we find out at the end that she's also in the shed with Ev Hillman and Peter the Beagle. Well, I say Peter the Beagle. We'll get to it. Anne as well. Anne Anderson, Bobby's sister, Sissy, completely cut out of this version. She just doesn't exist. Meanwhile, the affair between Joe Paulson and Nancy Voss, that gets so much airtime.
Am I ready? It's like the sign says, neither snow nor rain nor
heat nor gloom of night.
Can stay these couriers
From the swift completion of their appointed round.
They go out of their way to make Becca the most annoying person in the whole show.
Joseph R. Paulson, you get back here this instant! You ought to be ashamed! Didn't you forget something?
No, what? I'm sorry, honey.
You ought to be! The sandwiches! For you and the boys?
Oh.
For your fishing trip?
Really, this is great. Thanks a lot.
And as for Nancy, now in the book, Nancy Voss is described as being an older, glamorous woman, you know, just like a bit of a MILF. But in this, oh my goodness.
Sure.
You aim it. Ooh, you got a strong grip. And then firmly pull the trigger. Anyone in front of it'll be history. I like a man who knows the value of preparedness.
Nancy, I was a Boy Scout.
Nancy's scenes must have been written by a teenage boy because she's constantly horny with these blonde 1930s waves in her hair.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Ladies,
Hi, Nancy. Well then, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, Nancy. That was close.
And like a matching sort of Jessica Rabbit drawl. Like they basically turned her into a femme fatale.
What about Becca?
No, forget it. Forget it. Becca's gonna be manning those phones day and night until they find him. Oh.
Day and night.
Night and day.
And oddly enough, I didn't mind that choice. Like it was something. It was entertaining. It just felt a bit out of place. Because everyone else was in Tommyknockers and she was in some sort of Barbarella spoof or like a snuff film with her like lipstick ray gun.
What are you big old bears doing out here in the woods all by yourself?
We're an important police business, man.
Is he always so mean and grumpy? Is he like that to you too, Trooper? Or is it just me?
I mean it, ma'am. On your way. I'll put you under arrest.
Under arrest?
Really, Ben? Jingles, could you get the hell away from her?
Okay, boys. I just wish you'd known better than to come snooping around like this.
Hold it right there now. Put up your hands.
Come on, Ben.
I mean it, lady. Put them up.
Do as he says, ma'am.
You wouldn't stop a lady from putting on a little lipstick, would you?
Some people call it final passion. I call it final surprise. Bye-bye, boys.
When she's standing by Joe's grave, he was buried very quickly, but when she's standing by his grave and she just takes off her black mourning coat to reveal like a slutty red dress and she's like, oh, it's time to move on, like I cackled. It was so ridiculous.
Look what I dreamed up this time. Wait till you see what it does. Are you watching? Do you love it? Well, I gotta go now. And Joe, don't misunderstand. What we had, it was really, really fun. But I need to get on with the rest of my life. The time of mourning, it's over.
Like when we finally get to Bobby Anderson, the way that actress reads some of her lines is so bizarre. Like God too, like they went in and out of competent acting. And Peter, we finally got to it, Peter is not a beagle.
What are you looking at? Wanna get out of here?
What a baffling choice. That detail is so simple and easy to get right. Why is Peter a terrier? The book, multiple times over, refers to him as a beagle. This stuff matters. You can't just make him any dog you like. And I get that animals are difficult to work with, but at the vet, when Peter's meant to be bad-tempered, there's like a wide shot where you can see that he's wagging his tail, and it just completely broke any attempt at tension there, because it was like, oh, he's not angry, he's excited.
Hey, what's hey?
Guard's drunk speech at the party, in the book it's pages and pages of dialogue, but in this it's over in less than 10 seconds, which made me laugh. So did all the crossfades during Guard's poetry reading. When the show ends with like God sacrificing himself, you have to listen to that same bad poem again before the credits roll. And the fight he gets into as well with Uncle Bargle when he like punches him, the stunt work on that was terrible. Oh, and Butch isn't tall.
Bye, Butch.
Bye.
Butch Dugan, why didn't you hire a tall actor? His character is literally nicknamed Monster because he's like 6'5". What? When Guard comes back to Haven, Bobby looks the exact same, and throughout the Becoming, she never really gets much worse. Like, she always has this same, like, hateful auburn bob, and the makeup team sort of just put a bit of black under her eyes and called it a day. Like, oh, she's an alien now. There's also a scene where her skin peels a little bit, but I wasn't really getting alien, I was getting like, oh, she's been out in the sun for too long. They all keep pulling their teeth out too, when the teeth are meant to fall out of their mouths, which I felt was weird. They were all kind of like, ah, look, a tooth. They're also digging up the spaceship, and it looks nothing like a flying saucer. Again, maybe they couldn't afford that visual, but the ship is a dish. And in this, it kind of looked like Maine's answer to Machu Picchu. It was like a bunch of random stone blocks. And then when Guard flies it into space at the end, it kind of looks like a toy tack. It looks nothing like what they were digging up. Instead of it being like a singular trench that they're all digging into, there's like multiple sites all around this clearing in the woods. And I found out after watching the Tommyknockers that the director didn't want to go with a traditional flying saucer because he thought it would look too campy. Which, one, that's what's in the book. That is what's in the book. Two, how ironic. This movie has so much camp, especially every scene with Nancy Voss is camp. I thought the inventions were well done. Like Bobby's telepathic typewriter looked good, the mail sorting device, the voice changer, that scene where Hilly makes Bobby disappear. Like, they were actually decent, in my opinion. I think like lots of other Stephen King adaptations, there was a deliberate effort to censor or change anything that was too graphic or adult in this version. Like Guard, for instance, is meant to be an alcoholic, but after the party scene, he's stone cold sober for the rest of the 3-hour runtime, and it made no sense. There would be scenes where he'd be holding a bottle of alcohol and not drinking it. He'd just be like, ah. All of the shed victims are also saved at the end. Like Ev, Ruth, Peter, the non-beagle, they all make it out alive. They were like, oh, we can't kill a dog. I was surprised as well that they would even show Peter in the shed, but it wasn't as graphic as it is described in the book. I think the most egregious change that was made is that the Becoming is actually a big con in this version.
They lied to us. They're all dead. You're the liar. Just listen to me. They're using us. They're killing us to bring them back to life. We've listened to you long enough. Find a way in.
Like in this one, the Tommyknockers have actually tricked the people of Haven so that they'll be subservient and can be used as slaves to bring the aliens back to life rather than turn into aliens themselves. And I guess the reasoning behind this is that they wanted the good optic of having Bobby and all the other Havenites be redeemed once the aliens were defeated. And I think this also means that unlike the book, where the Tommyknockers in the ship are dead the whole time, some of them actually revive and fight with Guard and Bobby. I wasn't sure about the design of these Tommyknockers either. They're much more of a caricature alien than what the book describes them as. Like, in the book, they're meant to be gelatinous and translucent. They have, like, tentacles. The only common denominators here was that they had the, like a flat, snouty face that's almost reptilian and, like, long claw fingers. For some reason as well, the town isn't just called Haven. Like, in one scene, there's a road sign that clearly names the town Haven Falls instead of just Haven. It was called Haven Falls. Maybe they couldn't get the rights to just Haven, I really don't know. I did find out, though, that they filmed the whole thing in New Zealand because it was cheaper than being on location in New England, which, yeah, that was a smart money-saving tip, because I didn't notice. I never once was like, oh, this isn't New England. Like, it looked convincing enough. There's also no Altair 4 in this version. Like, when David disappears, he just goes to the spaceship. I guess making a set look like another planet would have been too ambitious. But then, when Ben and Jingles disappear, we never actually find out where they went. She just says the Twilight Zone. At one point as well, Ruth is also accosted by Peter the non-beagle, and she makes a Cujo reference, which was very cute. Would have appreciated a few more references scattered here and there, though, as this is like a 3-hour production. So yeah, that's the Tommyknockers. Stephen King has publicly said that he hates this book, and it's probably why he's not written another sci-fi novel since. It is very cookie-cutter alien story. Like, the tropes are there, nothing that happens is overly creative. Like, I can think of half a dozen sci-fi novels that tell this story better. And it does drag on for way too long, and doesn't have the most satisfying ending either. But having said all that, it does have its problems, but I love semi-autobiographical fiction. When you know what the writer was going through at this particular point in their life, and you can pin down every small detail to something that happens in the book, I think that's magical. I think that's the best instance of art imitating life. So while it might be easy to take it for granted and to, like, write the Tommyknockers off, for the most part, I really enjoyed it. Like, it chronicles one of the most challenging moments in King's life, while still being an adventurous jab into a genre that he hasn't explored since. Like, in my opinion, it really epitomises the nightmarish charm of, like, 80s King. And I think that's why, to a lot of people, it's their favourite decade of Stephen King. So yeah, thanks for watching, and as always, toodaloo.